Okay, so our last presenter of the evening is Matthew David Spencer, or App. I love the way he signs his emails. Currently, Matt is working as a postdoctoral research fellow at the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Calgary. And he's also an assistant to the coaches on the Calgary Dinos coaching staff. And tonight his presentation is on the effects of obesity on breathing during exercise. Please welcome Matt.
Thanks. I'm pretty excited to be here. I guess I'll start with this little business is the first indication that I belong here. I'm a nerd. I'm happy to own that as my truth. The second bit I want to point out, I left 12/6/14 up here as a reminder to tell everybody that tomorrow is both Friday the 13th and a full moon, and we won't see that again until 2049. I kind of feel like only a nerd would know that. And really what I want to do is I want to justify, before I get into the business of breathing limitations in obesity, I want to justify why I'm here. I really feel like I belong, and I want you to believe me. But I made a critical error when I asked some of my friends to help me come up with examples or reasons why they thought I was nerdy. And so I'll start with two important lessons. The first one is don't ask your 20-year-old friends, what about it makes me nerdy? Because if you're an assistant basketball coach with a bunch of 20-year-old women, girls, you send out an email saying, get back to me with what makes me nerdy, and Lindsay gets back to you with this. Ha, what? You're talking at a nerd convention? And of course the answer is yes, Lindsay. She was pretty excited for me. The other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to ask your friends who've been friends for the last 20 years, what is it that makes me nerdy? Because they inherently will misunderstand the question and think it's open season on what are all the things about me that you kind of dislike or think are quirky. So when you ask this question, you run the risk of also finding out that you're a hypercritical jackass with OCD who takes everything that others say literally, and this is my favorite part, but at least does so with surprisingly good personal hygiene. So don't ask your friends what makes you a nerd, just feel it. This is all true, and that's why I feel, before I move on, it's important to point out that Lindsay should have texted me a question mark. But let's move on. So, I'm qualified to be here because of some conversations that I've had or been involved in. Everybody knows the association between a happy wife and a happy life. There's a perfect correlation, so the coefficient of determination is 1.00. If you're in my office, though, the next step is the paradoxical realization that no matter what you try to correlate with happy wife, it's always 0.0. So the fact that I didn't make this observation myself doesn't qualify me as a nerd so much as a nerd by association. But I would like to thank Scott for this one, because this was really his gem. I'm not sure the correlation between this observation and me remaining single. Athletically, I'm a nerd. So I am involved with the women's basketball team, and a lot of people, when they think of basketball, they think about the slam dunk contest or the three-point shot. If you're just a little bit of a nerd, you might think about Notre Dame Irish great Skylar Diggins, who's now in the WNBA. But if you're a real bona fide nerd, you're going to spend 4 hours on a Saturday 2 months ago, give or take, downloading data from every player in Canada West so that you can plot their scoring efficiency versus the role that they play within their team's offense. And you obviously know that the people who are on this arc are the Canada West All-Stars. And if you're over here, you need to get down here and play a smaller role until you get good, you get more efficient, then you move over here, and once you're really efficient, then we're going to move you up here and give you a larger role. Duh. I'm a bit of a nerd romantically, so I think a lot of people take the easy way out and rely on devilish good looks. Other people, when they're trying to convince a woman, hey, let's get involved romantically, they rely on fancy automobiles. Then I guess before I move on, I want to point out the OCD and nerdiness of matching the color slide with the car color. But my main approach is instead to tell people about my H index, because obviously any woman who doesn't know what an H index is isn't the one for me. Again, possibly related to me being single. And finally, wordplay is nerdplay. Get it? And anybody who signs his email with this for the last 10 years is a certified nerd, and I can't move on until I merge them together. I'm nerdified. So before I tell you about obesity, I'll tell you how I ended up studying obesity and maybe engaging in some of it. So I did my undergrad in my hometown university at St. Francis Xavier. A bunch of years later, I did a PhD at the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario. And from there, I had a plan that I was going to go and visit Kobe, Japan, to do a bit of a postdoc there. It was never supposed to be a long thing, but it turned from medium to short. And so I got on the phone and called some people in Dallas, Texas, because when you have a really short window to find the next thing to do, you don't have time to get your own money. You call people who already have it. And fortunately, Tony Babb said, yeah, sure, come on down. So I went from Western to Japan to Dallas, and then finally I ended up here. But the phone call was really a proposal. Hey, Matt, you should move to Dallas to study dyspnea on exertion in obese adults and children. So obviously I Googled dyspnea. That's shortness of breath. I pretty much already cracked the code on exertion. I knew that one. So that's during exercise. And a postdoc was born. I was going to study dyspnea on exertion, which I, of course, short form DOE. Also possibly reminiscent of my time in Dallas. So we have subjects come in and they exercise at a constant work rate, and then they rate their perceived breathlessness. They say, this is how out of breath I am. And so with the subjects that we had in our studies, anything less than 2, we said is non-DOE. Anything 4 or greater, and of course there's some verbal anchors here, is plus DOE. And anybody who rated a 3, we kicked them out of the study so that we could have a bigger separation between the groups. No, that's ethical. That part wasn't funny. It's an inescapable phenomenon, and I think this is important before we move on, that this isn't just something that happens to people who are out of shape or who don't exercise very often. At some point, this famous Texan is going to rate a 10. I'm completely out of breath. This Texan is going to also rate a 10 at some point. The difference is that one of them is going to do it at 60 kilometers per hour going up a mountain. The other one does it at 6 kilometers per hour while cycling up a mountain, or not. But it's important to understand that no matter what, no matter who you are, dyspnea is in your future and probably at some point in your past. I do want to take a bow. I don't know if you guys can tell, but I kind of like myself. And I think it's important to point out that when I go into something, I go in all the way. So when I left home with an unrelenting heart, because it just keeps beating, but also I was the Lance Armstrong in this story. But I said I really want to feel what these people are feeling. And so, this is a taco and hamburger storage facility that I built while I was in Dallas. I caught obesity from a taco, and the closest taco shop was only about 2 blocks away. But by the end of my almost year there, I was always panting by the time I arrived. So I know a thing or two about dyspnea in obesity. Back to the science. So breathlessness during exercise is, we call it dyspnea on exertion, and it's a common symptom in obesity. But really interestingly, during submaximal exercise, some obese women are going to experience this at a much higher level than others, even if they're exercising at the same absolute work rate. And so I'll talk a bit in a minute about submaximal exercise, what that is. But this is not a story of Lance Armstrong and this lady. It's this lady who is going to rate really high, and this lady who, during the same exercise, rates a really low breathlessness. So why is that happening? That's really what I wanted to answer. And then the other thing that's important, and if you're wondering, well, why did he do this? And if you only take one thing away, the who cares is important. Among the best treatments for obesity, of course, is physical activity or exercise. And if you have breathlessness as a potent deterrent to exercise, then people can't access that treatment. So if you can get to the root of what is causing this breathlessness and solve that issue, then people can exercise, and then they won't be as likely to continue to suffer from obesity. So there's a logical path, but the rest of what I talk about is just the sort of nerdy minutia of what makes this woman rate something and this woman rate something else. But there's a reason for doing this research. So a whole bunch of things had been looked at before I arrived. It may be that one group has a higher work of breathing. It might just cost more energy to lift and lower the rib cage. It may be that their breathing pattern is different. It could be that they have a qualitative respiratory sensation that's different, possibly differences in fat distribution. And the one that I really was most concerned with is, do these people just have different fitness levels? So we'll talk about that really briefly in a minute. But basically the test is going from sitting on a bike at rest, and all of a sudden we say, okay, start cycling in 3, 2, 1, go. And instantaneously they go from doing nothing to cycling at 60 watts, which is a brisk walk. That's the intensity that it would feel like. And we ask the subjects to rate their perceived breathlessness at the end of this 6 minutes. And this is how it's been done for quite some time. And I got there and I had a great conversation today about this. The new guy has to be really careful about how he phrases the question, like, well, why do we do it this way? Because you don't want to sound like you're saying it's wrong. But really, I had identified what I thought were 2 problems. The first one is, what if 60 watts isn't the same for everyone? And the second one is, what happens in the first 6 minutes before we get here that we're ignoring? So I challenged our group to go and look at those things, and we did, and what we found was pretty interesting. So 60 watts is 60 watts is 60 watts. It's 60 watts for everyone. But the problem is that it's possible that these 2 groups have different levels of fitness. So VO2 max is the short form for, it's actually the maximum rate at which you can consume oxygen to replenish your ATP supply. but that's jargon. It just is fitness. So these two groups may have a different fitness. So if one group has high fitness and the other has low fitness, then for one group 60 watts is easy, and for the other group 60 watts is hard. And so then they're not the same thing. So maybe we shouldn't be using 60 watts was one of the first things I thought of. And the other thing is that we know that ventilation, the rate at which we change our breathing, so when we're at rest we breathe a little, and out here at 6 minutes we're breathing more, we're breathing heavier. But it's not like we just instantaneously jump up to breathing more and breathe more for the whole 6 minutes. It follows a near exponential increase, and it's possible that the rate of this change may be different, and that might tell us something. So the first thing I did is I said, well, let's make sure we go back and look at the ratings of perceived breathlessness at 2 minutes and 4 minutes, even though it was at 60 watts. And the other thing I did is I said, we already have these people cycling doing an incremental test to exhaustion. So this is the maximum amount of work that they can do. And we have these ratings every minute by minute. So at some point, even if they have a different fitness, we can compare them at the same ventilatory level, and we can compare them at equivalent exercise intensities. And so this becomes important. So we took 78 obese women, body mass index of greater than 30 and less than 45. So I can explain this after if you have questions, but this is sort of the standard cutoff for obesity. And we split them into two groups based on that measure that we took just at 6 minutes. So 34 of the women were plus DOE or rated 4 or above. 22 of them were minus DOE, and we excluded 22 of them and didn't consider them further in the study. Importantly though, all of those things that I had listed, so these people, the two groups were the same age, they were the same size, they had the same fat distribution, they had the same body composition, the same ethnicity. There was nothing different between these two groups, or apparently, other than the fact that one group was rating high and the other group was rating low. And so I'll orient you to these slides, but it's the baseline is when they're just sitting on the bike, not exercising, and then minute 2, minute 4, and minute 6 is of exercise. The first graph is of ventilation, so how heavy are they breathing, okay? The second graph is how high are they rating. In each case, the blue is the plus DOE, the people who rate higher. So we can see there's this exponential increase in the how heavy or how deep they're breathing, okay? And the neat thing is that there were significant differences that the plus DOE group was breathing more. To do the same amount of work, they had to breathe more. So this tells me, as somebody with a background in exercise physiology, that they're working harder. These two groups don't have the same fitness. So I was right. Okay? The second thing though, and this is neat, is that even though breathing ventilation is matched at rest, the neat thing is that these people rated higher, and then they consistently rated higher. And I went back and I said, well, because it's the same absolute work rate, we can measure a time point where the plus DOE group has a lower ventilation than the minus DOE group. So if I take 6 minutes for white bar and 2 minutes for blue bar, it's still 60 watts. But interestingly, the trend is reversed over here. The blue bar is higher than the white bar, and so even though the white bar is breathing more, the non-DOEs are breathing at a higher rate, they're giving more ventilatory effort, they're still rating less breathlessness. Oh, what's going on here? So obviously I fit some linear regressions to nonlinear data. So Ben said he's going to have his paper published next week. I think mine's going to be rejected tomorrow. But anyway, the neat thing is that these two lines have essentially the same slope, okay, but they have a different intercept, which means that for any change in ventilation, I get the same change in rating, but at any given ventilation, the DOEs are always going to be higher. So they have the same sensitivity to a change, but they have a different perception of what an absolute load is. They take breathing at 30 liters per minute and say, oh, this is really uncomfortable, whereas the other group says, yeah, 30 liters per minute, whatever, I'm fine. Okay, so we went and looked at the incremental data from the VO2 max test, where we know from previous literature that there's an exponential increase in ventilation. And I just took this nonlinear equation and I fit it to the ratings of perceived breathlessness. I said the RPB has to go up if it was in linear proportion to ventilation in one case, it's going to have to be in linear proportion again. So that means we should get this exponential curve. And of course, that's what happens. So when we have exercise intensity here from 0 doing nothing to 100% is max, and the ratings, there's this exponential increase where if you fit the curve, boy, I wish these didn't show up as solid lines. They were dotted when I made the presentation. Again, you've got one group with a different intercept than the other group. So doing nothing, one group says, yeah, I'm not breathless at all. And doing nothing, one group says, feeling a little breathless. And then at virtually any exercise intensity until you get to very max where Lance Armstrong is going to say 10. His max might be different, but I've scaled this to percent. So everybody is going to get to 10. There's no error bars, but trust me. And then I said, okay, well, what happens if I fit it against ventilation? So it should be linear, because we knew that from before. But it turns out that it is. And again, the slopes are identical, but the intercepts are different. So that means that for any change in ventilation, if I go from breathing 10 liters per minute and I go up to breathing 30 liters per minute, my rating is going to increase. The difference is, at 10, I'm going to rate 0, and somebody who's plus DOE is already going to be 1 or 2 units ahead of me in that rating. This was probably the part that I was most proud of, because nobody had thought to do this. We took exercise out of the equation. We said, well, if there's a linear association between how much they breathe and how highly they rate their breathlessness, then let's just have them hyperventilate. So we perfectly matched them. No, this is again, this is ethical. That one's not funny. So at rest, they're just sitting around doing nothing. And then we say, okay, now breathe through this metronome, and there's feedback on a screen. And both groups perfectly targeted 40 liters per minute, which is a little uncomfortable, not that bad. 60 liters per minute for a lot of these subjects was really quite uncomfortable. They were really huffing and puffing to try to keep up. And of course, the thing that's neat is that despite the fact that we perfectly matched the ventilatory demand, they're doing the same amount of work with their lungs. One group said, this is more uncomfortable, I'm more breathless, I don't like this, than the other group. Okay, and again, oh no, I didn't include the linear regressions, but it's the same story. Same slope, different intercept. And so I guess the first thing is, even if one group has a high VO2 max and the other one has a low, this is still true, that one group is going to find 60 watts easy, the other is going to find it hard. But that doesn't necessarily mean you can't use 60 watts, because in fact, we perfectly discriminated between these two groups, because when you put them in other conditions, they still had the same response, which was totally divergent between the two groups. So I answered my own question and said, it's okay to use 60 watts. It's not ideal, but you can do it. And if you've tried to publish, you know that no matter what you do, if you say, okay, everyone do 60 watts, a reviewer will say, no, you should have had everybody do the same relative work rate. And if you did some people at 54, others at 64, you would have someone say, well, you clown, you should have used 60 for everyone. So there's no winning, but certainly using one absolute work rate that's submaximal for everyone is going to work out okay. The other thing I think that's important to note is this idea that there's an exponential increase with exercise intensity. So we know that ventilation is going to increase exponentially. What's brand new is the fact that ratings of perceived breathlessness also follow an exponential increase when you plot them against exercise intensity. When you plot them against the ventilatory load, it's linear. In all of these conditions, there's a linear relationship. So that's kind of neat. The RPBs across a wide range of ventilatory loads are greater for the plus DOE compared to the minus DOE. So again, no matter which VE, no matter which ventilation you pick, the plus DOEs are always going to be rating higher. So there's a greater perception of a given ventilatory load, but the slopes are the same. So this suggests that there may be differences between the two groups in their perception of or their sensitivity to the ventilatory demand, which I thought was pretty exciting. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I know I'm just about to get to my last slide, but I meant to say at the beginning, the last and latest sure sign that I'm a nerd is that when first Matt was talking, and he was going on about those codes, and he was trying to transfer money from account 52 to 97. I was like, okay, I'm going to crack this code. And then later, when he showed us the wallet number, it was, so remember, 5297. And I'm like, oh, really, Matt? 115792? Thank you.